A year prior to Carl Jung's passing, this extraordinary interview was captured on record. It remained unpublished, uncited, and according to certain scholars, vanished entirely from official documentation. Within this conversation, Jung spoke not of psychological theories, but of the mysteries that await beyond death, of passage, of homecoming, of the vast unconscious realm into which we all must eventually journey. Through this exploration, we shall unveil one of Carl Jung's most enigmatic revelations, his perspective on the afterlife viewed through psychoanalytical understanding. We shall examine Jung's comprehension of the human spirit, the death archetype, and his conviction that death represents not termination, but metamorphosis. From the nocturnal visions of those approaching death to instances where individual identity dissolved only to re-emerge, these elements will comprise our exploration today. During the middle of the 20th century, surrounded by technological advancement and Europe's crisis of faith, Carl Gustav Jung stood as a bridge between dual realms, empirical study and esoteric wisdom, logic and spirit. He achieved recognition as a distinguished psychiatrist and Freud's protege, yet his perspectives transcended scholarly limitations. In contrast to his peers, Jung refused to view death as consciousness's termination. He maintained that individual identity serves merely as a fleeting facade, concealing something far greater, an eternal essence linked to his concept of the collective unconscious. This became his life's work, examining dreams, symbols, archetypal patterns, and the visions of those standing at death's precipice. As his own mortality approached, his words grew increasingly forthright. Jung maintained that each individual possesses a shadow, a persona, and a true self, psychological layers that emerge through spiritual evolution. Yet death, in his understanding, unveils the most significant archetype, the Great Passage. He documented the experiences of the dying, who witnessed visions of illumination, crossing points, ascending paths, figures in white garments, youth and ancient beings, symbols universal across all civilizations. These archetypal images, Jung believed, were not mere neurological fantasies, but pathways to a profound return. His theories found support among personalities like Edgar Cayce, Wolfgang Pauli, and even Albert Einstein. Though conventional science dismissed his mystical concepts, Jung persisted in his documentation. Through journals, correspondence, and confidential interviews. One such interview, legend suggests, disappeared immediately following his death. This lost conversation is what we shall attempt to reconstruct today. Carl Jung never regarded death as a conclusion. From his early years as a physician in psychiatric facilities, he witnessed dying patients and observed remarkable consistencies in their near-death encounters. These individuals, complete strangers to one another, recounted identical imagery: corridors, bridges, luminosity, river crossings, encounters with beings of light or departed loved ones. Jung began to theorize that these were not mere hallucinations of a deteriorating brain, but expressions of a profound psychological reality, the collective unconscious, containing the universal heritage of all humanity. He documented that death exists as an archetype embedded within human consciousness, comparable to the mother, hero, or shadow archetypes. It represents not an external occurrence, but an internal phenomenon. Consequently, death signifies not personality destruction, but its transformation into another state. He contemplated increasingly, if archetypes transcend mortality, might the soul also persist within this field, beyond temporal and physical constraints? From these considerations emerged his quest for posthumous understanding. Jung devoted considerable attention to dreams, particularly those experienced by individuals approaching death's threshold. He termed these transitional visions. Within them appeared imagery absent from ordinary existence: colossal staircases, luminous cities, suspended islands, eternal fires, faceless entities. Most remarkably, these dreams manifested across people of varying ages, backgrounds, and beliefs. Jung observed that consciousness during these moments seemed to disconnect from earthly reference points and submerge into something greater, universal. He recorded that this represents the journey back to archetypal origins, where the personal dissolves and the soul merges into an eternal framework without beginning or conclusion. He personally experienced peculiar visions during sleep and claimed that within these states, he sensed the presence of the deceased, perceived soundless communications, and received symbols he later discovered in mythologies he had never encountered. For Jung, dreams were not illusions, but connections between existence and what we term the afterlife. This connection resonated most powerfully when an individual approached the ultimate threshold. In his penultimate year, Jung, confined to a wheelchair and deeply absorbed in reflection, granted a private interview to an unnamed Swiss journalist. The conversation was documented but never officially released. According to those present, Jung spoke not as an academic, but as someone with one foot beyond the boundary. He communicated softly, almost in whispers, as though concerned his words might fracture the barrier still anchoring him to his physical form. He revealed, death no longer inspired fear within him. He sensed that consciousness does not vanish, it expands. Like a blooming flower, a rolling wave, a voice within silence. He declared that at death's moment, an individual connects not with external circumstances, but with their deepest essence. This essence transcends personality, memory, or physical form. It represents a field saturated with symbols, eternal structures from which all manifestations emerge and dissolve. His tone remained steady. He stated, "We fear not death, but ego dissolution. Yet the soul differs from the ego. It endures when everything else fades." When the interviewer questioned Jung directly regarding his beliefs about post-death existence, he offered no definitive response. Yet his gaze remained unwavering. He declared, "Following death, what persists is neither physical form nor identity. What remains is structure, configuration, pattern." He elaborated that during life, individuals shape their souls like sculptors, through anxieties, longings, affection, suffering, uncertainties. This sculpture does not vanish. It undergoes transition. Jung labeled it a psychic blueprint that continues existing within the collective unconscious like a wave. It abandons personality's form while preserving its vibrations. He offered music as an analogy. A composition can be recorded, performed, forgotten, yet the sound, once generated, never disappears. It integrates into universal resonance. The soul follows this pattern. After death, we become not someone, but something. We return to the symbols from which we were constructed: mother, hero, shadow, wise one, child. Jung explained that death involves personality dissolution and immersion into deeper order. If an individual worked on self-development during life, achieved purification, understood their archetypes, their post-death journey would be luminous and swift. Otherwise, their soul would remain imprisoned within its own projections. This, he declared, constitutes genuine hell. Jung stressed that following death, individuals encounter not objective reality, but their own internal structures externalized. He stated, What we call the afterlife is not a location, it is reflection. Each person will witness what they harbor within. Those who lived in terror will confront terror. Those who carried shame will discover themselves in spaces where shame becomes existence's very fabric. He called these phenomena shadow projections. They do not punish, they educate. But only if individuals can recognize these as self-reflections. He described the worst destiny as entering an endless cycle of one's own ego after death, witnessing identical things, experiencing identical emotions, without understanding that the solution lies within. He termed this archetypal hell, not because it represents punishment, but because it creates stagnation. Many souls, he claimed, become ensnared in their own illusions and cannot escape. Only awareness, awakening within death itself, opens the forward path, toward the self, toward return to the structure he called light. This was not illumination from lamps or the sun. It was the light of comprehension, the light of clarity, the light of truth that individuals carry within but rarely perceive during life. Throughout the interview, Jung noted that most people imagine afterlife illumination as external force, something descending from heaven, from beyond. However, he said, this represents a misunderstanding arising from literal interpretations of religious symbolism. He explained, genuine light originates not externally, but internally. It marks the moment when the soul achieves self-recognition. When, passing through projections, fears, and archetypes, it suddenly recalls its essence, the aspect that was never born and never dies. He called this the self in its purest form. Not personality, not consciousness, but spirit's very structure. Then true post-death awakening commences. He compared this state to someone seeing dreams for the first time and realizing they had been asleep throughout their entire existence. There, within this inner light, everything connected to earthly reality disappears. Names, roles, even memories. Only presence endures, motionless, clear, silent. Jung asserted that this light cannot be summoned or accelerated. One can only approach it through self-honesty, through accepting one's shadow and rejecting self-deception. It is neither reward nor gift. It is homecoming. The light, he said, does not judge. It simply awaits your return to yourself. In the interview's remaining portion, Jung addressed a topic he seldom discussed publicly: his personal encounter with death. He recounted an incident from 1944 when, following a heart attack, he stood at life's threshold. Then, he said, he felt his soul departing his body and ascending. He saw no tunnels or angels. He felt himself rising above earth, higher and higher, until a temple of light materialized before him, suspended in emptiness. But at the precise moment of entering this temple, his consciousness was summoned back. He returned to his body with the understanding that he had been shown something he was not yet permitted to fully comprehend. This episode left an indelible impression. Jung said he no longer feared death, but knew that threshold, which he had approached, could not be crossed twice. This was neither dream nor vision, but an event he called initiation. From that moment, he began describing death not as ending, but as entry into completeness. He wrote that life's true purpose is death preparation, not as loss, but as return to a state without separation, where you are everything. Jung believed that all human existence constitutes individuation process, gradual approach to one's authentic self, a form of spiritual maturation. Death, in his view, was not tragic finale, but the final culminating phase of this transformation. In the interview, he said that everything we fear, Dissolution, disappearance, control loss is precisely where we must surrender, not externally, but internally. He asserted that the soul cannot continue its journey while clinging to ego, roles, self-image. Only complete acceptance of one's shadow, pain, fears, and errors allows a person to pass through death's archetype undistorted. He called this the ultimate act of self-honesty. He emphasized, death does not liberate one from illusions. It amplifies them if unresolved during life. Therefore, real work begins long before departure. In this sense, death is not accidental. It is conclusion. If individuation is lived consciously, death becomes not ending, but culmination. The final transition into a state where you no longer seek meaning, because you are meaning itself, not personality, but consciousness form returning to wholeness. The interview recording's keeper later confessed hesitation even to replay it. Not from fear, but from sensing that what was spoken was not intended for general audiences. Jung expressed ideas that could be considered heretical by both religious and scientific establishments. He claimed that death is not merely transition, but merging with something beyond language. He said consciousness is not brain product, but its visitor. That the soul does not inhabit the body, but employs it as temporary instrument. He mentioned that many so-called mental disorders are not aberrations, but the soul's attempts to awaken to its true nature. These concepts conflicted with medicine, academia, and church doctrine. Therefore, the interview was never published. Jung did not request this. He simply spoke his truth. But the world was unprepared to receive it. Those who heard the recording said Jung's voice contained no uncertainty. He did not preach, persuade, or prove. He simply described his experience, like someone who had glimpsed where definitions cease. The interview's final minutes, according to witnesses, were most extraordinary. Jung fell silent. For several minutes, he simply sat, gazing through the window, as if listening to something within. Then he said, "Everything I have spoken are merely metaphors. Truth cannot be verbalized. It can only be experienced." He smiled and added, "When you die, you will not be surprised. You will simply understand." These words concluded the recording, which over the years became legend, unofficial, nearly forgotten. Fragments appeared in diaries, were quoted in letters, but the complete text was never released. Perhaps because it contained no sensational revelations, no immortality formulas, only quiet, profound certainty that death is not period, but open doorway, and that one can only pass through it with lightened heart. Jung departed this world a year later, peacefully, without struggle. He left no clear afterlife doctrine, but he left something greater, an inward path. And if we listen, this path does not begin after death. It begins now, in every honest self-examination, in every accepted shadow, in every refusal to fear the end, because the end is simply return. Carl Jung's greatest revelation was not that death exists, but that it does not destroy. It reveals. He said we do not die once, but gradually. Each time we lose illusions, masks, attachments. By the final breath, only what is authentic remains. This, he believed, was psychoanalysis's true purpose, not treating symptoms, but preparing for final transformation. He viewed death as archetype woven into consciousness fabric. He did not seek afterlife proof. He knew death is not event, but stage, transition, not disappearance, but return to unified field from which all emerges and to which all returns. His personal experience of the boundary between worlds became the final point in his great search. He realized that everything he had touched, Images, dreams, the unconscious, had always led him to that door, and beyond it was no terror. There was silence, acceptance, light. This interview, hidden for nearly 8 decades, does not reveal new knowledge but long-forgotten truths. It reminds us that the greatest minds did not renounce the soul. They simply sought language for it, and Jung found it. Through symbols, images, inner myths that unite us all. His words resonate differently today, not as academic hypotheses, but as personal guidance. We exist in an era where death is expelled from consciousness. But Jung did not fear it. He gazed into it as into reflection. And if we dare to do likewise, we may hear not emptiness, but echo of our own awakening. Because beyond death is not void, beyond death is homecoming. Carl Jung dedicated his life to exploring the human soul, but only in his final years' quietude did he begin speaking of the most profound truths. Death, he said, is neither adversary nor nature's flaw. It is threshold, transition, journey's completion that begins not with last breath, but with first conscious inward glance. He said death does not destroy. It gathers, purifies, returns to essence. And if a person lives in dialogue with the unconscious, with archetypes, with their shadow, then death becomes not ending, but homecoming. This interview, vanished from all archives, holds no sensational claims, offers no guarantees, promises no salvation, but it carries voice, calm, quiet, certain. The voice of someone who peered where words end and was not afraid. If what you have just heard resonates with you, support us with a like. It will help others hear what long remained in shadow. Subscribe to After All to not miss the next journey to the boundary between life and the unknown. And now, a question for you. Do you believe consciousness continues after death? And if so, what do you feel when you gaze into the unseen? Write in the comments. We want to hear your voice.